Hello, welcome. Today this is our last class on language and power dynamics, and today we will focus on language and gender, and we will do so by reading Deborah Cameron's work on performing gender identity. Deborah Cameron is a feminist linguist who works at the Department of Language and Communication at Oxford University in the United Kingdom. Here, in her work Performing Gender Identity, Young Men's Talk and the Construction of Heterosexual Masculinity, she uses Judith Butler's idea of performativity. That means that humans enact gender through activity rather than simply reiterating something that was previously given to us. And Deborah Cameron here analyzes the role of language in that gender performative work in which we engage daily. In this article, she talks about an observation that was done by one of her students, to whom she calls Danny. And she explains how that observation was partial, but that always observations are somehow partial because we all have our own preconceptions. Okay, so for her, the main idea here, and this is a little old, this is a bit old. This text is from the 90s, and some things have maybe changed, but I have assigned it because I think it's a very important paper to understand how gender is something we construct through our daily practices, as the philosopher Judith Butler explains, and that language plays a very important role in that process. So here, Deborah Cameron explains that discourse is not something we invoke to explain gender differences, but is something through which these gender differences are constructed. And as I was saying, this builds on the work by Judith Butler, who published this very influential book, Gender Trouble, where she explains that gender is performative. You remember how we also studied performativity in relation to language when we were studying how language does things? Well, here what she explains is how gender itself is performative. This means that feminine and masculine are not what we are not traits we have, are effects we produce by the way we do the things we do. So gender is a repeated stylization of the body, a set of repeated acts, and think about, remind this idea of repetition, a set of repeated acts within a frame that produces the appearance of natural kind of thing. So as the poet and philosopher Simone de Beauvoir said, one is not born, but rather becomes a woman. So here Butler says that becoming a woman or becoming a man is not something you accomplish once and for all at an early stage of life, but is something, gender, that has constantly to be reaffirmed, to be publicly displayed. Again, this idea of repetition, of display, by repeatedly performing particular acts in accordance with the cultural norms that are always context-specific, which define masculinity and femininity. Okay, so what Deborah Cameron explains in this paper is that language plays a very important part in that daily performance and daily public display and construction of our gender identity through our activities. Speech is an important part of that process too. And here, if gender is something that we perform, we do have some kind of agency. And an example of that agency is if we think about how we or how some people sometimes engage in acts of transgression, of subversion, of resistance, how you can sometimes not do things as you are expected because of that gender identity you are constructing every day. So going back to that observation that Deborah Cameron's student Danny did with his friends, she notices something that he was not able to notice, and is that in this conversation, what she sees is that during a long time the conversation, these boys engage in what is usually called gossip. And this is important for her because of several reasons. On the one hand, gossip is a pattern of conversation that is usually ascribed to female stock, right? To femininity. And here we see a group of boys who are constructing their masculinity and their heterosexual masculinity, engaging in gossip. Here we also see some kind of cooperation, which is also a conversation dynamic, which is usually ascribed to female, opposed to competition, which is usually ascribed to men's conversation. And here these men are engaging in cooperation and in gossip. However, we also see some competition. This is not what we would call an egalitarian talk, no? The observation that Danny made. So here, Deborah Cameron, maybe she's suggesting us, maybe why don't we deconstruct these oppositions, no? As, for example, cooperative conversation, competitive conversation that were so popular at some point in linguistic anthropology, and better think about that performative work, gender performative work we do through our speech. And she then focuses in that performance of masculinity that this group of men are doing in this observation. And for her, they engage in gossip to to build on their masculinity, to construct their masculinity, as what they're doing is doing gossip about homosexuality, while distancing themselves from the subjects about whom they're speaking. So for Deborah Cameron, while they're gossiping about gay colleagues and they are doing jokes about gays, and they're engaging in gossip, what they're doing is, again, construct this idea of masculinity that for them is very associated with heterosexual, with being heterosexual. And this is a question I have for you now. This was written and published in the 97. Now we are in 2022, in 2020, 22nd. And maybe has this changed? Is masculinity still connected and constructed in, or not anymore, or not that much? This is an open question I have for you. Well, so as a conclusion, for her, she emphasizes the importance of focusing on the performative work we do to construct masculinity and femininity in our daily lives, reminding that they are not monolithic constructs, but things that we construct and in which we engage through the public display of performances, including linguistic performances. So I hope you enjoyed this text, and I hope you also enjoy the different assignments I have prepared for today. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.